Common Council Budget Workshop to order. Have roll call, please.
Iverson.
Here.
Schatzinger.
Here.
Reamer.
Here.
Gallops.
Here.
Denkert.
Here.
Gotsky.
Here.
Sorensen.
Here.
Flit.
Here.
All yours.
All right, thank you, everybody. So we'll get started on the 2025 City of Ripon Budget Workshop. On your tables, you should have a copy of the presentation that is going to be gone through by myself and Amanda. Depending on timing here and everything, we may take a break after an hour, or if you guys want to take a break at some point, just let me know. We can kind of play that by ear, but there's snacks and things. Feel free to get up and refresh whatever you need through the presentation. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. We'll be going over a lot of information, and if you have on your table as well, there's a couple supplementary documents, just one that has yellow highlights. It's a couple sheets of the budget, and then there's also a bid budget as well. So if you need a copy of the actual budget and you want to go through that, certainly just let Amanda know. She can get you a copy. If anybody out there wants a copy of the presentation, we should have extras. All right. We're going to start this off, and the goal is kind of to start very high level, start up top, and work our way down to actual looking at the budget as it's been drafted. Everything is preliminary, but overall, as we went through this effort, the goal coming into the 2025 budget, or the overall vision, was to address the community's most pressing issues and opportunities, and be guided by the financial management plan and some of our financial audits that have come more quickly than previous years. By using those, the budget positions the city to aggressively resolve and address both past and present financial issues. And then the proposed budget prioritizes investments in infrastructure, staffing, and community amenities, reflecting our commitment to continued growth and improvement. Thanks to some of the planning we have done, we are seeing progress through projects, through funding opportunities, and community development. So just in the past year, getting certain grants and accomplishing a lot of projects that traditionally we haven't been able to accomplish. Obviously, those things cost money, so that's why we're talking tonight about a lot of different issues. As we move forward, it is critical that we continue to look forward and to our future, and ensuring that the decisions we make are with that future in mind for growth and prosperity. So that's very high level. That is how we are, that is kind of my message going into the budget, building off of what we've done in the past, but certainly with an eye to the future. So some of the 2025 overarching budget goals and challenges. First is really building off of our planning efforts. So we've done financial management planning, parks planning, we've done housing, we've done some capital improvement planning, really looking at those and putting them into action into the budget. Reviewing revenue sources and funding options for capital and sustainable operations funding. So that includes use of TIF dollars, enterprise funds, and other opportunities to raise revenue. We are certainly trying to provide competitive wages and benefits for employee recruitment and retention, and continue to just refine this process to make sure it is a healthy and thorough process through the budget, season, I would say. One of the bigger things based on the financial management plan and the audit that this budget tries to do is address financial shortfalls and challenges of the past, while balancing tax rate and other financial impacts balancing that with current needs. Really bringing the past into today. We sort of keep getting held back by some of the financial situations and decisions of the past while we're looking forward. So it's been sort of a challenge as for administration to say, okay, we are planning out this project, we want to do this, we have this capital improvement plan, but then not necessarily have the finances in place to tackle that because of past projects or past decisions. And we've talked a little bit about that on Monday night, but this is a major issue that we look to start resolving. We want to stabilize utility finances. That's a big part of that. And so we're looking at rate increases and impacts, and then balancing any cuts for staffing or other programming. Making sure that it's a balanced cut, that it's not like overly targeted or punitive to one certain area, making sure that the cuts are based on data and impact, right? So being strategic about any cuts that may need to occur. So that's kind of the big picture of what has been in administration's mind moving into the 2025, bringing forward the audit information, financial management planning. That has been kind of weaved into this timeline and our process. So this is where we are in our process. The little star is there. We are at the budget workshop. The decisions or the discussions tonight will change depending on certain conditions that happen over the next couple months. But ultimately, by the middle of November, we hold our public hearing and set the budget for the year. We're about 50% of the way through. You can kind of see where we'll be talking about the budget in coming weeks. But the budget started many months ago with department heads and input from committees. So it's been kind of a culmination to this point where we're discussing the first, or reviewing the first draft. For those that may be new or don't understand all the accounts that the city manages in this budget, this is a list, and this is what we will be going through tonight. So these are all of the city funds and budgets that we draft and review and approve. The general fund, you can see all of the departments that are supported by the general fund, and generally speaking, these are your tax levy supported funds. You have your special revenue funds where dedicated revenues go to certain expenditures. So you have your EMS, revolving loan funds, taxi, community promotion, so on and so forth. They could have some levy support, but they aren't solely reliant upon tax levy. They have other revenue sources and generally are try to keep them separate from the general fund. We have the debt service fund, which is just payment of our debt, capital projects, which are larger projects that are not just smaller kind of one-off projects that are incorporated in the budget, or smaller vehicles. They're kind of our larger ones. Our TIF districts are our capital projects, which we have quite a few TIDs. Business Improvement District is a component unit fund that goes to Main Street, and that's a tax levied by the bid district. And then the utility funds are our enterprise funds, which are our water and sewer. So we'll be going over all of those. If there are not any questions, I can move into some of the higher level information that will come through and some of the challenges of the past that will come through the audit and the financial management plan and some of the challenges of the past. As you may recall, we're working with Ellers to have a financial management plan put together. That has been nearly finalized. We'll have a final report. So some of this information is premature of that report, but certainly going through that effort has made a difference in what we are presenting tonight. as well as some of the audit information. So when we're looking at issues, you know, from the past, it's really helpful to have the audit done and look at trends. And then truly, the city has lacked some long-range financial planning. So this effort with Ellers has been very helpful. A major component of the financial management plan was the formalization and review and funding of a capital improvement plan. And the financial management plan included a capital improvement plan from 2024 to 2030 of $42.5 million, okay? That includes some very large projects. Large projects include the DPW facility, the state highway reconstruction, a new municipal well, road reconstructions, so Hamburg, Henny, Houston Street, larger reconstructions. It also had land acquisition, some equipment, and some smaller infrastructure projects in it. Overall, about half of the 42.5 million, or maybe 45% of it, are the big three projects that we are trying to accomplish before 2030. The DPW garage, the state highway, and a new municipal well and water treatment facility. A big component of the financial management plan and capital improvement planning would be utilities funding, road reconstruction, or taking about a third each, general fund, water, sewer, which is something we have struggled to do, right? This is just an example of some of the significant debt and rate impacts to accomplish that capital improvement plan. So you look at this down below, and yearly there will be required borrowing, there will be required revenue debt, which is essentially debt supported from water sewer. We obviously can get grants, and we can look at TID, we can look at other cash to help fund this, but the financial management plan makes some very basic assumptions, and it provides us a path to get a lot of this work done, right? That's where we need to go. Where are we today? The capital improvement plan, or the capital fund for the city, is currently at a $2.7 million deficit. That a couple years ago was $755,000, and it's grown over the past couple years. This is caused by larger projects that we've tried to or that we've gotten done while limiting debt to do them, but we do not have the cash to cover it. So correcting this deficit is rather important, okay? The projects that have contributed to this and didn't have funding or came in over what we had anticipated would be the Senior Activity Center, a garbage truck purchase, and the Vermont Street Parkway Terrace project. So the financial management plan has put forward some recommendations to attack this deficit, including debt. There will be some debt issued to cover some of that deficit. The Monday night, part of the $5 million that was issued, State Street is a part of this deficit, right? Cash and TID dollars will be used to offset a part of the deficit, and then levied dollars will need to be used to and committed to offsetting about $1 million of the deficit. That is what the financial management plan recommends. We'll talk about that in a second, but the capital deficit is manageable, and but as we need to be investing in certain projects and infrastructure, this has to be resolved as well, okay? So it's very important that we tackle that. Any questions on that? Sustainable funding through the financial management plan and the audit has come to bring light to some funds and some trends that aren't as positive or have had some ongoing challenges. We talked about it a little bit the other night, but the taxi fund has a growing deficit. We'll discuss that later, but It's always operated in a negative. The negative is just getting to be a larger liability, okay? EMS, the fund balance is less than it was 4 years ago. In previous years, we could have gone out and just bought an ambulance. We can't do that anymore, right? The last time we bought an ambulance was when the fund balance was $700-some thousand. Now, some of that has to do with some of the accounting standards, but ultimately, from a cash reserve perspective, EMS funding is not where it used to be. And like I said, when we have large capital expenditures there, you will not be able to touch that without having a problem, right? You won't be able to just write a check for an ambulance. Ambulances are also way more expensive than when they were when we last bought one. Water and sewer, we've obviously had 2 recent rate cases. Water in this past year, or 2024. Sewer in 2023. And so the financial management plan and that included the capital improvement plan that had funding from water and sewer really highlights the fact that there is not enough money to support those projects with the current rates and the current funding available in the utilities. So you can see there, we talked about this the other night as well, the unrestricted net position for the water, 562,383 for sewer. That's pretty much one project, right? That is not enough money to aggressively tackle infrastructure and the infrastructure needs that we are seeing, right? And part of the reason we're in a financial deficit from a capital perspective is the lack of funding here, right? There could have easily been, if there was a larger fund balance, we could have easily applied water and sewer to that. We don't have that, right? And clearly, everybody understands that if you do not address rates over a period of time, you're not building up the cash to then handle projects. So as you can see here too, the general fund balance remains steady at about $1.4 million. So some of these are the most notable trends that we've been tracking and reviewing over the past few years. And we need to address many of these now to ensure they don't complicate our future needs. That's really what is the bottom line in reviewing this. So the suggestions and some of the issues within the budget as we talk will address some of these issues. And happy to answer any questions about this before moving on.
Can we come back to some of the stuff after we've heard some more?
You can, sure.
Okay.
Of course, Doug.
Thank you.
We're trying to do this in sequence, but we can get it.
Well, I mean,
No, I'm kidding, Doug.
if I'm looking at the taxi fund, that's something we gotta address.
We'll address it. We'll talk about it, right?
Okay.
So as we enter the budget cycle, the immediate biggest discussion generally revolves around tax levy, right? What are taxes going to be for the year? How is that going to look? So we start there because honestly it's one of the largest revenue sources and it has one of the largest impacts on our residents. So as we look at it, we have some limits. We're under levy limits, and our previous year's levy was 3.846 million. Our maximum allowable, so they work you through a worksheet, where maximum allowable is 4.158 million, and the preliminary budget in front of you is at the maximum allowable. Some of the things that are in that levy that allow you to increase it are net new construction, right? That's a big thing. You're allowed to increase your levy by net new construction, which was 1.38% or $42,430. That is double what it was last year. So growth matters, net new construction matters, economic development matters, because it allows you to increase your levy more. And in previous years, we were starting off with $20,000 more in a levy, right? TID closures matter. When a TID closes, you open up more levy, and it's about 1.036%, so we're allowed another $31,000. Last year, as we looked at the levy and funding the operations and making sure that there was a tax levy and a mill rate that was that covered everything, we did not take everything we could take, right? So they allow you to go back in the levy worksheet and take $46,151 that we didn't take in previous budget cycles. And then a major part of this tax levy is the debt increase. Increased from normal years, but we're adding an additional $200,000 over the next 5 years, as recommended in the financial management plan, that would be due to capital to help pay back the $1 million, impacts the mill rate by about 45 cents per thousand, okay? You can look at the mill rate history and see where it has kind of been over the last couple years. $9 at $9.04. The anticipated or estimated mill rate is $9.38. So that's a 41-cent increase from the previous year. Okay? Now, that is based on an assessed value that is increased by 2%. That could change quite a bit, right? If the assessed value is not 2%, but 5%, the math changes and the mill rate changes. In addition to that, had we not done the $200,000 in this math, you'd be looking at a small levy reduction, right? Because of the growth and some of the other things that have happened in the city. The goal, we always try to have a goal. The goal would be to get this under $9.30. But ultimately, that's going to be dependent upon what the council wants to do. We certainly can have a goal or have a target. We can cut operations, we can cut funding certain things, and we can drive that levy down and drive the request down to then lower the tax rate. I would not recommend that we do that via the $200,000 increase for the deficit in capital. So that would come down to budget allocation cuts, right? So that number is where we project it to be based on, I would say, worst case scenario and a 2% assessed value. Yes.
I got a quick question. So how much, to get this under $9.30, how much are we going to have to trim the budget to lower that to $9.30 per?
Yeah, I would say that currently about $50,000.
About $50,000. Okay, thank you.
Just based on the $200,000 costing 45 cents, you divide that by 4, every $50,000 is about 10 cents.
Okay.
Any other questions with the tax levy? All right, so with the tax levy, we distribute it into 3 general areas. Those general areas that we allocate to are general fund, library fund, and debt service fund. Tax levy considerations, we just kind of touched on that. Balance the need to fund priorities versus lower tax rate, and this definitely is impacted by the $200,000 of additional levy in the debt service fund, okay? But 63% or just over 2.6 million goes to the general fund, 448,000, 11% to library, and 26% to debt service fund. Here's a little history of it all. As you can see, this is a 3-year history of general fund, library, and debt service and where the dollars are being distributed. Generally speaking, library fund and general fund have been relatively flat or stable. There hasn't been giant increases or decreases in allocation of levy to either of those funds. Overall, the increase this year, as you can see, is in the debt service levy. That's what's driving it up. Okay? There are no questions there. We'll turn to what is another fun topic when we are trying to do budget, which are our shared revenues. Overall, we have our shared revenue notice, and there, after the major change of last year with shared revenue, we're starting to see what impact that has. And you can see the graph here on the top. We were stuck at like 1.6 million forever, and that increased to just over 2 million. And that was because of the state legislature and Act 12, or whatever it was last year. So this coming year though, we see a 1.92% increase, or 38,895. Year 2 of the supplemental aid, that is the aid directly tied to the sales tax, is increasing by $8,300, $8,300, right? We have maintenance of effort requirements for public safety that have been tied to that additional shared revenue. There's still a little bit unknown impact on expenditure restraint, which we'll talk about in a second, but ultimately we kind of had a freeze based on the new shared revenue. And then also we do get video service aid, which offsets the decline in financial franchise fees through the cable TV, and that's around $20,000, so relatively flat. After the historic jump, we are starting to see the impact of the increase and that legislation. And while that jump from 1.6 to $2 million is certainly appreciated, a 1.92% increase is not going to be enough moving forward, okay? And that is, we're going to be back to the same challenges we were rather quickly, right? It's not growing fast enough. So this is just something we will have to manage and review over time. But ultimately, from my seat, I remain concerned about shared revenue and where it goes. Because $38,000 is not a lot. On top of, with our tax levy, net new construction is $42,000. You're talking about $80,000, right, of an increase to fund the budget. That's not a lot when you're talking wages, benefit cost increases, cost of just inflation, and trying to be more aggressive with capital and other investments in the community. So while it's very important, it's a lot of money, and we appreciate the past year, and so it's still not necessarily keeping up, but that's just the way it is, okay? Second to shared revenue, general shared revenue, is general transportation aid. Those estimates come out October 1st, so these are, or those projections come out October 1st, so we estimated a 2% increase. That's what's in the budget. That could change. If that changes and increases more than 2%, we can take some less levy, right? We can make that decision and cut some of the levy increase and offset and lower the tax rate. So that's a plan. But ultimately, we put a 2% increase in it. Your general transportation aid is based on a 3 and 6 year average of transportation expenditures for the community. And the more you spend, the more you receive. And you can look at 2023 and 2024, and you can see that we raised our 3-year average by $1 million in 1 year. And we raised our 6-year average by about $700,000 or $650,000. Okay? We are spending more money on transportation and infrastructure. We are. Okay? That is a great thing, but it's because of large projects, right? That's a big component of it. We've done back to back to back $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million projects, right? So that's all coming now into this formula, and it is increasing our general transportation aid. You can, yes, Doug.
But that general transportation aid does not cover the full cost of all the road work we've been doing over those 3 to 6 years, correct?
So you can see here on this one, you see the graph. We received, last year $585,000 and then $96,000 in connecting highway aid. Connecting highway aid is something we take to do all the maintenance along the state highways in Ripon. Okay, we are required to plow, to patch, to do all the maintenance activities, right? Crack filling, all of that. 96, I'm sure Alan can attest, particularly in previous years, $83,000. We are spending more than that to maintain the state highways, right? And just plowing, salting, if you add it all up, right, that is what they are paying us to do from that. That has increased because we are increasing our costs. They have funded a little bit more, so it's been nice to see a little bit of a jump. But it's sort of we've had conversations with the state about that, because their whole approach is well, we're not going to fix the state highway from a construction standpoint all but every 30, 40 years. So you're taking the connecting highway aid, it's your responsibility to fix it. So they don't come through and do patching or anything, they just come through and reconstruct it. They expect us to take care of a 40-year-old highway with less than $100,000 a year. Right? That's we all can see the condition there, and we leverage that to get them to finally pay attention, and that project is coming, right?
I just wanted to point out also that we've taken on, like you said, multiple projects and committed to them the past couple of years, and a couple big ones coming down. And when we're looking at budgeting for them, we also have to consider the increasing cost of maintenance for all of those projects too. So every project that we choose to do to improve, not only has an initial cost, which is offset through some grants and a lot of hard work on the city side, but it also has that long-term reoccurring cost for maintenance and everything that goes along with it. Even what we've chosen to take on now, that 2% or 4% increase isn't going to cover then 5 years down the line the increased maintenance on some of the projects too. So we'll have to start to look at that, I'm sure.
Definitely, and the state highways are kind of a big example of the ongoing maintenance costs of projects and what we are tasked with doing. Ultimately, the more we spend, the more we get. So that's a good thing. It doesn't hurt, right? And the $500,000 or $600,000 that we get in general transportation aid, that's not for really road repavement. That's literally for plowing, patching, maintaining them. Some of it certainly can go to capital projects, but literally street sweeping, all of it is incorporated into general transportation aid. And it basically funnels right into our DPW operations to maintain and address all the conditions on the roads. Ultimately, we're on a better path because we are doing more. And I would, with some of the projects coming, I would anticipate the average to continue to go up. The state could certainly increase the amount allocated. We can certainly apply for other grants and things. The more money you spend, the more grants you get, right? The bigger projects you do, the more money goes into this. So it's a good thing to look at and just be aware of. But this is just the estimate. Hopefully it's higher than what's estimated. And as we look at the capital improvement plan, as we look at this, we have a lot of bigger projects and we have a lot of, complicated projects that are in the capital improvement plan, ones that are full reconstructs. What we do not have in our capital improvement plan are smaller mill and overlays, right? We struggle to fund the smaller projects, right? We can fund operations, we do a good job there. We can fund large projects with debt and grants and TID and water sewer revenue. Where we struggle is sort of this middle area where we need $150,000 for a small project, right? And those can get in the way of getting the larger project done at times. Or you have to say, we're cutting operations to fund those projects, right? So through the financial management plan, there were discussions, and a budget consideration that I will bring forward is the implementation of a wheel tax. And that is an option for new funding. It was not included in the financial management plan to help fund the long-range capital projects because frankly, it didn't make financial sense. From the perspective of if we took out debt versus took on this, the cost to the average person for the debt versus putting in a wheel tax, it was more advantageous to take on debt than implement the wheel tax, right? Wisconsin law allows cities, villages to collect an annual tax. It's on the registration fee and paid per vehicle. All vehicles in the municipality would pay that fee. And 41 municipalities and 13 counties do it. Fond du Lac County does not. Okay? There are 6,385 vehicles registered in the city of Ripon. If you implemented a wheel tax at $25, it'd be $160,000 a year. The idea would be to create an enterprise fund to have a road capital improvement plan for pulverized mill and overlay projects, some of the smaller projects that are more traditional local roads that don't need full reconstructs, and to annually or every other year fund those projects. While we've looked at grants, we've received grants, we've looked at other funding opportunities and mechanisms to do more. If the expectation is for this community to do even more, we are going to have to find additional revenue to do it. This is not a popular thing in communities, but it has the ability to address a major concern in a fairly simple way that a common council can implement the wheel tax. It is paid via the vehicle registration, and then it comes from the DOT to the city. So this is an option, okay? It was one that was discussed at the financial management plan. As we discussed it, it didn't make it into the end report. What I will say about it is Fond du Lac County does not have one. They could do one. And then it's a little bit harder, right? And to say, well, you're paying them and you're paying the city, right? So there is some logic to saying, well, if you do it first, maybe it stops them from doing it. I don't know. But ultimately, 41 municipalities do it, ranging from $10 to $40. Okay?
We would set that number. If we chose to enact that, we could pick.
Yes.
The Common Council could set that number. And what we would do is we would form like a 10-year capital improvement plan for those funds. We would not be sticking it into operations. We would be sticking it into road reconstruction projects, not full, but, like mill and overlays, some of the ones that don't require as much. So it just comes down to how much you can do for $150,000 a year, realistically. Okay?
Does anyone break their wheel tax separately by like weight of the vehicle or car versus truck or anything
No.
like that? It's always just flat.
It's all flat. It's a flat, I think the ease of it is the city's not tasked with collecting it. It's just the annual registration comes with it on, and then the DOT forwards the check. So
it would be motorcycles and cars. That's it. Anything that comes through the DOT.
Yeah, anything with a Wisconsin DOT registration.
Yeah.
So there's no decision that has to be made or anything. This is just it's been brought up before, and based on the financial management plan, and where we are and some of the advantages of doing this, I felt it was important to bring it up as an option, right? So certainly if there's interest in pursuing it as a council, we can discuss that at a future meeting.
So maybe we go to, if we did this at $25, and I'm not saying either way we want to do this or not, we could potentially gather like $300 and some $1,000 every 2 years to fund a couple, 2-3 blocks or a street of mill and overlay. Or we could use that money to do a block and add some in there, but things would get done a little bit faster.
If you look at the capital improvement plan and what you'll see in the for the financial management plan, you will see large projects, large reconstruct projects. What you will not see are small projects, because we have that many large projects and complicated projects. So Hamburg, Henny, Houston, I can't remember the other ones that are off the top of my head, but those are large, expensive projects, right? Some of the more neighborhood roads and maybe newer areas, or areas where the utilities aren't as aged, but the roadway is in bad shape. Because when we look at doing the project in an area, we look at kind of a trifecta of things, right? How's the surface? How are the utilities? How's the stormwater and like curb and gutter, right? We look at it all. If there's a project where the road is bad and the utilities are good, right, or newer, we don't have that on the plan, right?
Right.
And so for those projects to get put on the plan, or to do smaller sections, or some of these areas, it's going to be a challenge to fund those without additional revenue from somewhere.
And some of this comes back to the general fund just not having enough balance to cover some of these.
You could cut operations and say, okay, let's put more money toward that exact thing, right? There's a lot of pressure on the general fund right now from an operations perspective, and I think you'll see that where there's just not. There's a healthy fund balance, but you don't want to take your fund balance and put it toward that, because then we're putting ourselves in a disadvantaged position. And that's really what happens a lot of times, is we take on a bigger project and we go into we take a fund balance lower and then it pays it back over time, right? But ultimately, to generate $160,000 revenue in the general fund, we would be looking at significant cuts to services.
Quick question. So we're talking about projects, say like over in Grand Street, across from St. Winston Claus reconstruction, that little road there. those are the kind of projects we'd be looking at with this wheel tax.
Similar to 2 years ago when we did Woodside, that type of project.
Right,
We just pulled the
small,
black.
I don't know about the utilities under Grant Street or anything like that, but that's about a block, roughly, a little Grant Street road between Fenton and Highway 23 over there.
Yeah,
That's the kind of
we would
project.
we would have to look at, we'd meet with, our staff and engineers and come up with a 10-year plan and say, here are the worst roads, right? Other communities have implemented wheel tax and they put it in the general fund and they use it for operations and maintenance activities. Our plan would be to have a segregated account, an enterprise fund, to tackle projects that otherwise we are not going to get around to for another decade.
Alan you had like a algorithm for how many miles that we would have to do every year to maintain, was it?
I did it for a prior community, I haven't done it for this community yet. But
Okay, but it's like a couple of miles, like this would allow us to do a few miles each year, or as Doug suggested, if we saved it for 2 years, we could do a longer stretch of road.
correct. And this, as Adam is alluding to, is this is a way to help the community do more in any given year, or any given 2 years, to, I guess, stretch the dollars. And for the purposes of wheel tax, the perception is that you would use the money for transportation-related issues, spend it directly on a road. You're showing the citizens that you are using that money for exactly what it is perceived to be intended for.
If I remember the number for approximately the cost to mill and overlay one block is roughly about $50,000.
We haven't had that specific conversation with our engineer yet, but yeah, it's not inexpensive, but it's doable with this kind of money.
But with this kind of money, you'd be looking at maybe 3 or 4 blocks a year probably.
Right. There are years where you might do a short section. There might be times where you have to skip a year in order to accumulate the dollars in order to do a longer road.
I would, at first, when this was suggested, I was kind of appalled, because I don't really like to increase taxes or fees. However, we have so much deferred maintenance on our roads, well, on all of our infrastructure, but what constituents most talk about are the roads, because that's what they see. And so I think that this is a very viable possibility for us. We could add this into the budget if the council so chose, because the budget's not set yet.
It's the number one thing I hear, fix the Lincoln roads. Fix the roads. Well, it costs money. Here's a pot of money that we could potentially use to start fixing these 1 or 2 block roads that need a mill and overlay that haven't been attended to for 20 years or 15 years, that need some attention. And this money would go, if we chose to do this, would go into the enterprise fund, spent only on road construction.
John, did you have something?
I did. Could we find out a little better estimate of how far we can go with 160?
Yeah, I think-
if it is so much per foot.
I think that's where we would go next with it, is forming, a capital improvement plan to actually say, here are the next 10 years, right? Here are the projects, right? And how much we think we can get. You obviously have to, look at it from, obviously inflation, it's just gonna, you can have less over time, but certainly we can look at doing that. And that was just, that's what that'd be the next phase of this, is to look into that.
I think we should, so then we can tell people, with that $25, we can get 3 blocks done every year, or whatever the estimate would be.
Steve?
When we fix roads, what are the engineering costs on these roads?
Usually any project is about 15% of the overall project cost. That's 12 to 15%. With the larger, more complex ones, it's probably more like the 15%. These ones are smaller. These are more simple projects, right?
Yeah, well, the only reason I brought that up, not to interrupt you, but would it behoove us to have a city engineer instead of farming the stuff out?
There's one major hurdle to that is the number of types of engineers required for city work. Where having a firm where we're paying a fee for all of those engineers to be available, as opposed to having one person that still has to farm out 90% of the work.
I would just say that I think that approach would be going backwards based on where we're going, and the holistic approach to funding and engineering the infrastructure and the needs of the city are better served by a firm. You may be able to find someone to come in to be a city engineer and pay them, but you're still going to need to farm out certain things. They are not going to be able to help with every single aspect of it. And I feel like right now, we do not have the workload in terms of number of projects to justify hiring somebody in that regard.
I think hiring a city engineer, I think that's about $150,000 with benefit package, and that's on the low end. So I don't see how we can.
The market for engineers is incredibly different today than it was when we last had a city engineer.
It's very pricey.
And engineering is very specialized, and you would need several, not just one.
So we can talk about this at another date, but obviously just a way to maybe address some of the concerns that have been brought forward over time with our infrastructure. Next is the fund expenditure restraint concept in our general fund. We budget to meet expenditure restraint. That payment we received is about $131,000. We do not know the expenditure restraint limit at this point, but we can kind of guess based on the inflationary number of 3.2% and 60% of our net new construction. We're looking at about a cap of about 4% for our net new or our expenditure restraint. The preliminary budget growth in the presented budget is 3.27%. So I don't envision us getting close to the 4%, but we'll continue to monitor that number and budget accordingly. So kind of that's sort of the bigger picture, what goes into a lot of the budget, some of the bigger concepts that impact some of the recommendations. We'll move now into kind of looking at the total general fund, or the total budget summary, and then into the general fund. So on page 1 of your handout, there is a little spreadsheet, and it's on the presentation as well. The total budget summary here, you can look at it. The total 2025 projected revenue is $20,173,000, and total expenses are $20,290,000. That is an increase of about $2 million or $2 million or so from 2024. And you can kind of see the total revenue and expenses from the past few years. The increase proposed in the 2025 budget is driven primarily by capital projects. It's about 2.1 million of it, and debt service, which is about 106,000 of it. Beyond that, the other funds remained relatively flat. Okay, so that is our total budget. The capital project fund does not include, and this budget does not include, the DPW project, because then we would be at a $30 million budget. But we'll run that kind of separate. There's been steady growth over the past years in capital utility and in the budget. A lot of past increases are due to utility rate, debt increases, and TID values increases. So that's why some of this grows kind of larger as years go by. If you raise utility rates by 50%, you're obviously going to have more revenue and expenditures, so it grows with that. So this is the total budget. Our general funds, special revenue funds, this is all the funds from the front page collected into one pot, right? If no questions there, we'll move into general fund revenue summary. This summary is on page 1 of your budget handout. Total general fund revenues are about $6.483 million. That's an increase of about $89,000 or 1.4%. The major, the real notable increases there are just mostly property tax increase. The allocation of property tax increase is about $15,000 or about 0.56%. So not a huge increase in allocated property tax to the general fund. The remaining funds are just sort of projected out, and you have, intergovernmental revenue. So your shared revenue, as that increases and general transportation aid increases, that number increases. So that's just a general summary. The next page shows kind of a breakdown of where we are receiving the majority of our general fund revenue. 41% is local property tax, 46% is shared revenue, 3% is license and permits, and then 10% is everything else, okay? The detail for this revenue is on pages 2 and 3 of your handouts. Do you have anything to highlight from a revenue perspective, Amanda, in pages 2 or 3 that would be of note?
Just a few things. You will notice there are substantial change amounts, specifically law enforcement grants. We have some under total licenses and permits, under fines, forfeitures, and penalties. We really just tried to review what we were actually receiving for revenue and tried to adjust the budget to be a little bit more accurate on what we're actually getting. So, like I said, law enforcement grants from the county, that is our task force seatbelt money that we get on a monthly basis. We did increase building permits, electrical, plumbing, heating, and air conditioning. We've been consistently receiving more than we have been budgeting for, so we increased those amounts. The only other one would be like weights and measures, but that's kind of an in and out for us. We have to pay that out, but we do get that back in. Weed control, we've seen regular increases in that. And then park and rec programming fees might seem also high, but we do, that does kind of go back hand in hand with the detailed page for Park and Rec. A lot of their proposed programs that they are planning would either be self-funded or via grants. So while it looks like we're spending $35,000 on programming, really the only difference on what they were budgeting and what we're expecting for revenue is about $2,700. So that's about it.
So overall, revenue is up about, like I said, I think 1.4%, so not overly huge from 2024. Not a large number, about $89,000, $90,000. Okay. Any questions about any of the general fund revenues? A summary of expenditures. There are 11 departments, core departments that are funded from the general fund. You can see them all listed there. 2024 general fund expenditures total the $6.483 million. And that's an increase of about $159,583 or 2.52%. So overall, it is a money in, money out budget, basically balanced as it stands. And then you can see on the next page of the chart here, where does the money get spent, or what percentage goes where? And this is on page 1, kind of summarized, and then greater detail throughout the budget document, but 39% to DPW, 33% to police, 9% to administration, 6% fire department, 4% Parks and Rec Senior Center, 4% city administrative services, which is kind of a catch-all fund, and then 5% for elections, city attorney, this body, legislative, capital, or cable TV, and building inspection. So that's where it gets distributed out to. And then this chart just shows you how much. So Public Works, 2.523 million, police, 2.156 million. And then after that, you have administration, 576,000. You can kind of see the Parks and Rec, 236,000. So that's kind of the overall numbers behind the percentages. We'll go into detail in a minute, so, unless there's any questions about kind of the overall expenditures, we'll dig deeper in a minute. We want to talk a little bit here about wages and staffing. What is included in the budget from a wage and staffing perspective? The budget includes the new labor agreement with the police department, 3% cost of living, and then a pay for performance 2%, which we've put 8 eligible employees into with an impact of $11,458. So that is included in the budget in terms of wages. Staffing, there's one category of removal a few positions we removed, the crossing guards, at the halfway through the year, 50%. We are removing staffing for crossing guards. The main driver there is we can't find staffing for crossing guards. It has a minimal budget impact of about $11,000 or $12,000, but we are also looking at adding in crossing signals at certain areas, but that program would end in this budget after the school year. All other staffing levels remain flat, and there are no new positions included in the budget for 2025.
Wait. Question, so we're removing the crossing guards for the kids going to school. Is it because of the budget or because you couldn't find anybody to do the job?
I think it's a combination of both.
Both?
Yes.
I noticed the one at Tolman's not been around a while.
Yeah, she retired in the last school year and they haven't found a replacement.
Okay.
So the approach, and Chief Wallner and I have talked, we have put in the budget, and we are exploring doing crossing signals at heavy trafficked areas versus kind of like what's down on Union by the college, mid crosswalk there. We've talked about doing those versus a crossing guard. It's a minimal, it's a minimal savings next year. The following year, obviously, it'd be the full savings if we discontinue the program. We've had a struggle finding, and there's another solution out there that we were looking to explore, so.
Have you talked to the school district?
Bill, have we talked to the?
I haven't talked to them yet.
So we haven't talked to the school district about it, but it's something that if it remains a priority for the school and for the community and for the city, we can put back in the budget. The biggest thing is whether or not we then have staff to do it.
Yeah, still have to find someone to want to do it.
Yes.
Okay.
I'll speak a little bit on it. It's a very complex position to fill. Right now, I'm having problems with my crossing guards are aging out and they're retiring. They're a dedicated group and they've done really well for us. But as they get older, it becomes tougher. You're asking a crossing guard, if you think about it, to come every day during the school year, all kinds of weather, 1 hour in the morning, later on all day, and 1 hour in the afternoon. It's a very tough position to fill. We had one applicant that went up one afternoon with Esther before she retired and came back and said, I can't do this. We had one. one applicant. So we're struggling in that area. So we're exploring some other ideas as far as safety and issues there. Yeah, we haven't replaced her on Tolman Street. We added some pedestrian crossing signs up there. We're trying to monitor that every day. The officers up there. And then, the lighting that we're going to be adding up there is going to help that as well. But we've left them in the spots right now where we have the littler kids going. But it's becoming a problem. It's becoming a concern. And I don't know how we're going to address it in the future. A lot of communities are having the same issue. Many communities are having the exact same issue. So,
Yeah,
some background there.
thanks for clarifying, Chief.
So other than that, there's no new positions, and we can look at overall wage and benefit analysis. So I wanted to show a historical analysis of what the total payroll costs the city of Ripon. So you can see here 4-year budgeted numbers for 2022 to 2025. So 2022 to 2023, there was a 4.22% increase, so about $213,000. That dropped to about 1.46% from 23 to 24. And in 2025, the overall wage and benefit increase is $41,157 or 0.77%. That is a miracle, folks. Okay? It is a lot of money at $5.4 million, but staffing is the #1 cost in all of our budget, right?
Is this through attrition that we've got this reduction in percentage of increase?
The reduction is primarily due to a combination of health insurance reduction costs,
Oh,
right?
so this is health insurance.
This is
And
everything,
benefits,
right?
okay.
Benefits, so health insurance, the removal of the surcharge, as well as the police union paying more in a year. So this is a very good thing to keep it at, it'll be nearly impossible without significant, either reductions in benefits or staffing to keep it at that level ever again, right?
Right.
But what I'm getting at is the decision to move to the state health plan, while expensive, has over time stabilized things and made things more manageable from a budget increase perspective, because there are communities that are looking at wage increases and health insurance increases that are, equating to 4 or 5% and hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's what our staff costs us. We'll talk quick about health insurance. Most of you are aware, sorry. Included in this are figures for the 2025 health insurance plan. You can see the rate structures between 24 and 25. We added dental. We have the 88-12 split for the police union and the contract. The decrease in premium for a city employee or for the city within a single plan is $36.47 per month, and about $95.55 for a family plan per month. And then we have 10 employees on a single plan and 29 on the family plan. All these numbers are in there. These are real numbers. So the beauty of the state health plan is we have the numbers in August or September, and we can actually budget. So we're not sitting here saying we think there's going to be a 10% increase in health insurance costs. We know what it's going to be. Here it is. It's in the budget, right? So we're in a really strong position compared to where we were a couple years ago. Is there any questions about anything, about any of this stuff, right? If not, depending on the time, we either can take a quick break or we can keep going. What do you all want to do?
I'd like to stretch for a minute.
Yep.
Okay, we will stretch for how long?
Take 5 to 10.
5
preferably, but I'll start screaming at 10.
I'm gonna do jumping jacks to warm up. Doesn't it cost money? Does it cost money to cool this down? I want to propose we turn off the cold air and save money.
back up here. So now we're gonna dive into the actual budget document, their page numbers with everything, and I'll have it up on the screen, and I will turn it over to Amanda to give me a break.
I was just gonna say, mostly to give Adam a break. So I am gonna go through the general fund, which was all of the accounts listed that Adam had spoken to earlier. So starting on page 4 for legislative, it's an easy one, there is no change. That's pretty much your guys' salaries, salaries and benefits, and a few extra fees, but there is no change to that one. Flip into page 5, city attorney, that is obviously Ludd. The only change that you'll see in that one is just the 3% in his salary. Everything else stayed the same. Page 6 is Ludd's detail, which didn't change, which didn't change at all. And for anybody new, majority of these you'll see the summary, and then the pages after will be the details. So that's kind of how this works. Page 7, which is administrative. So page 7 is our detail. That's admin. That's those of us in the office. There is an increase in salaries more than the 3% that you'll notice. We do with Karen retiring. Her salary previously had been allocated to water and wastewater. With the addition of Mary, we have kind of shifted some of my salaries a little bit more, but that explains kind of why there's more of an increase in salaries than just the normal, 3% that you would expect to see. The only other increase that's probably worth noting is travel and training services. We just added a little bit extra in there for some HR conferences for Mary to attend. And then there is detail for admin on pages 8 and 9. So if you have any questions during it, just interrupt me, but if not, I'm just gonna keep moving along. Elections, page 10 and 11, you'll just notice there is about a 50% reduction. There are only 2 elections next year, so we kind of chopped away at that one to get us more in line with what we're expecting in terms of costs. 12 and 13, which are city admin services, which kind of Adam said they're more of all-encompassing services that affect everything in the general fund. A couple of things we will have to get you yet on this one. We don't know the projected property and insurance rates, or property and casualty rates, I should say. So those will be coming. We should be able to speak to a better number at the beginning of August. The only other addition would be under the transfer to other funds. Last year we had a $15,000 transfer to EMS. This year we are also transferring $15,000 to taxi to help cover some of that deficit in that fund as well. Moving along, pages 14 through 17 are the police department. So that includes your emergency management and animal control budget as well. Nothing really changed in the emergency division and the animal control, so there was just a few things I kind of wanted to point out in the police budget itself. Utility increases, that is, I believe, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a fee from the county for a Spectrum hard IT line, so that is a new addition that we have to cover. Adam and Bill spoke to the removal of the crossing guards, so that's how come you see a decrease in the part-time salaries. And then there is the addition of the crossing and pedestrian signs, which is under the equipment one, which is why you see that, yeah?
I'm sorry, Amanda. We're on page
14.
14?
Yep, 14 through 17.
Okay. We talked about, you mentioned utilities a minute ago?
So so PD has utility service as a budget item. It's,
Well, I'm just curious, what's the firearm range lights? What are those?
We have lights down the firearms range, so just the fact that we had them hooked up and we have lights inside of our building down there, we have to pay WP&L for that.
Okay. I'm just curious. Thank you.
yep, no problem.
It's also not detailed in there, but I believe I also, my budget, take care of the stop and go light. I'm not sure why, but I do.
Because Atlanta doesn't want it, no, just kidding.
take care of the maintenance.
Okay.
And the only other thing I'll mention too with the emergency division is, remember we have one siren yet to replace, tornado siren over by the middle school on Sullivan Street, so that's included in.
I was gonna say that is, yeah, that's in that emergency division.
Services or emergency division.
That's that first,
26,000.
account number under emergency division, that 26,000 that you see is for that siren.
And the overall, the big reduction, you know, and the biggest impact of why there's a 6.46% decrease in police is equipment. We bought all of the new radios last year out of the budget at around $120,000, so that is removed.
Okay. Any other questions on PD?
Nothing.
If we turn to page 18 and 19, that's your fire department. They had just requested actually a minimal increase. It was a 0.43% request from the city. So that is all that's the only change you'll see in there. Okay. Page 20, if we turn to that one, building inspection. We did increase that one slightly because, like I talked about when we were talking about our general revenues, the building permits, that permits section that we increased, the total of what we projected for revenue in those, 80% of that then goes to pay the building inspector. So that's how come you do see an increase in the professional services line for that one. That $65,200 is a calculation of those fees.
Are we getting any closer to hiring somebody?
We'll talk about that at a later date, Doug.
Okay, thank you. I just haven't forgot.
Okay. Public Works, pages 21 through 31. So this one is a big one. You will notice we tried to make it a little bit easier to kind of jump back and forth between the summary pages and the detail pages. So each of Alan's divisions are kind of color-coded, and they tie into the detail section, which was a great improvement for Alan. If we look at the operations division, that's that top peach one on page 21, the biggest changes for that one would be forestry removal. So I think we have about 112,000. That's in the other contractual services line. 112 is designated for forestry removal. And then the very next line item, office supplies, that did take quite a bit of a jump, but that is for the workstations at the new building. Okay, and that detail for that section is on pages 24 and 25. I won't go to that, but those are the pages that go with that. If we go on down to the streets division for Allen, major things to note there, an increase in professional services that is related to pre-employment and drug and alcohol testing for employees. And then under repair and maintenance services, there is some storm inlet repairs and then bridge maintenance. So that's where the two increases in that streets division comes from.
So I'll just note here a couple things. You know, utility services, the street lights in the community cost the city about $110,000 a year. In addition, in repair and maintenance, we have $45,000 for concrete paving repair. That's state highway and other concrete repairs to the roadways. We have new areas here, about $35,000 for bridge and stormwater that Alan put in. And then the $50,000 is the sidewalk maintenance program. That's kind of a bare minimum program at this point. And then moving down, there are contracted asphalt pavings and crack filling, so just miscellaneous pavings and or crack filling. So a lot of this is maintenance to roadways.
Okay. If we turn the page to 22, we can talk about the Parks Division. Major expenses with that particular division would be about 10,000 as an increase in our repair and maintenance of buildings and grounds. We did put quite a bit in there for increasing of the planned replacement of restrooms. I shouldn't say replacement, but repair of the restrooms. I do believe that's something that'll be ongoing, if I'm not mistaken.
The hope is that we do a pair of restrooms a year for the next few years. We've got some pretty nasty.
I didn't want to go into detail, but
Looking
it's,
urinals and toilets.
right, for sure. Buildings and grounds, major expense on that one is City Hall flooring. So we have about 45,000 budgeted in the repair and maintenance of buildings and grounds for that particular division of Public Works.
That includes police department flooring, and then if we can stretch the budget into city administrative offices, and if we can really stretch the budget.
I like this carpet, I don't know what you're talking about.
You know, I was just looking for some new carpet for my living room. Can we
Yeah,
get it in
you
one
can
piece?
have it.
I really
Yeah.
like the
You
hard.
might need a rug.
Right, It'll come back in style, just give it a minute.
It's already come and gone several times.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Moving along to waste management, which is the green section. The only really increase is just the increase in the landfill fees that we see. We need to increase that. Compost, really just a minimal, you'll see just a minimal in the salary for the employee that's allocated to that. Otherwise, nothing else changed there. Cemetery, the only change there also is the salaries. When we did the budget for these guys, we really tried to more so reallocate more of the salaries to what they were actually, the work that they were doing. And we were a little light before, so we're correcting that this year. Alan, did I miss anything? Okay. Thumbs up from Alan, so we're good, unless anybody else has any other questions?
Just a question, like, why, is there a plan to not have overtime? Because I see like 2023, if I'm just picking one, there was overtime. This year there was none budgeted, but we hit 2,000 in overtime already. And then next year we're still not budgeting for overtime?
Which page are you on, John?
Unless I'm reading it wrong.
It just depends on the area in which you're pulling it from. So operations doesn't have any overtime because generally, like the salaries, full-time salaries coming from that division are salaried, or they're not overtime type positions. When you move to like streets division, there's $15,000 of overtime because of like plow truck driving and all of that. So as you go from division to division, it'll be different. But there's overtime in streets, planned overtime in waste management, planned overtime in, not so much in cemetery, but most of it would fall into where we're getting the overtime.
But like the streets one, it was like 31,015. But like if we're looking back at the previous year, it was 31, and this year will probably be like 25 or something by the end of the year. So why is it lower than we've seen in the past 2 years already?
I think it's lower because the goal.
I believe it was earlier this year, we changed the employee handbook to restructure how overtime is allowed.
So the employee handbook, good point, we used to pay overtime at any time outside of the normal work hour. And now we only do it on weekends. So we're not paying overtime for snow removal during the week. So we anticipate it being lower, hopefully, but it's all dependent on, there's snowstorms on Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Sure.
Not good for overtime.
Anything else on Public Works? Okay, then we can move forward to page 32, which is Parks and Rec, so 32 and 33. The major changes you'd see here is we do have an employee now that's taking the health insurance, so that's how come you see quite a jump in that line item. Under professional services, it does show 25,000 in there. If you look at the detail page, we did budget 20,000 for park signage, so that explains kind of the jump in that one. Travel and training had a slight increase just with the increased costs in going and attending conferences and trainings. So there's a slight increase there. And then they do have quite a bit more programming that they are budgeting for. They did want me to note that a lot of like the day trips to Fireside, Amish country, if those, if they do not, those would be self-funded. So, they charge accordingly. So if, they don't have the money to do those trips, then those plans or programs, I should say, would not happen for them. So while it seems like quite a bit, it is reflective.
Just increase in programming cost is offset by the increase in programming revenue.
Exactly, yep. Yep. And the last one, yeah?
I have a question about, first of all, what kind of park signage are we going to be replacing?
Adam? Park
The
signage?
plan would be to replace some of the older park signs at our parks, right? So, Barlow Park has like a brown and yellow sign. We would go
Like the entrance signs.
the entryway
Yeah.
signs, right?
Okay.
Kind of rebrand and clean those up.
Now, the other question I have is that, if they did this day trip to Fireside or Amish country or Door County, do they get is it just going to be always break even? Or what if they made $100 on it? How was that booked? I mean, is that even possible?
They could. I think they tried to figure out how much the trip is gonna cost and charge accordingly. I mean, they
So they're
probably
looking to
round
break
slightly.
even, that's all.
I think so, yeah. And they do try and keep them fairly reasonable. I mean, it is
The model now
more the
is-
seniors.
I'm not looking to squeeze them for money, I'm just,
No,
that's
yeah.
It's a break even. It's
Yeah.
absolutely.
what I kind of thought.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're
there-
not,
There may be a couple dollars
Yeah.
positive or negative, but the
Yeah.
goal is to break even.
Okay, that's what I just was questioning, that's all. Thank you.
That's the 20,000. Yeah, so if you look on page 33,
right here.
the detail, oh, Adam has it up. Park signage is 20,000 of that. Last department that is included in our general fund would be cable TV. Really minor changes there. There really isn't anything that kind of sticks out. If there are no other questions, then we will dig into the special revenue fund, which I believe Adam is covering.
Thanks, Amanda. So I'll keep the budget item up here, the budget document up, and kind of go through some of this. So we'll move into special revenue funds. The EMS budget is here. There's on page 36 and 37. It's important to have a healthy fund balance. We talked about that earlier in the night, about kind of the trajectory of the EMS budget. The challenge here is often the delay between the service and the payment, right? And the other challenge is the payment is usually not as much because we get only so much reimbursed from like Medicare, right? So there is a challenge there. And because of that, we have revenues being reduced in the budget to around a gap between service and the revenue coming in, or a gap between the billable service and the amount we get back because of Medicare. Ultimately, as I mentioned, the fund a couple years ago was able to buy an ambulance and was able to buy cardiac monitors. We are not in that position anymore. There is outstanding revenue that is owed to us that's being billed and collected by the billing service. But that is, it's only going to get reimbursed to a certain amount. So overall, the service revenues remain relatively flat or a little bit of a decrease. There's a $15,000 general fund contribution into this. Contracts with the surrounding townships and some of the villages that have been sent out, and we will have come back to you. It's just a renewal of essentially what was done a couple of years ago, but those formal contracts would provide about a $1,300 increase at 3% and per capita charge of $11.17 to the surrounding communities that utilize the expenses is about 11.68% increase in part-time salaries. That's because we're seeing an increase in call volume, and we have tried to remain competitive with part-time salaries, so there's an increase there. But overall, it's an 8% in expenditures, again, mostly because of equipment and no longer a need to purchase radios for the year. So, and then there is a $30,000 plan to transfer out for equipment or capital. So we do still want to put money into the fund balance, but overall, you know, pretty standard budget for EMS, a little bit down, but overall gets the job done for the year, we think. And there's no impact of, you know, any planned consolidation or any planning effort there. There's no impact in 2025, so that's not touched in this budget. This remains an independent department of the city. So, anything to add, Mitch? Yeah.
What is the publication dues and subscriptions? It seems like $10,000 or...
Those are, I just lump those all together. Those are all our subscriptions. So we have our e-schedule software, which is approximately, that's our scheduling software. It's about $2,500 a year. Our hand-heavy pediatric system that we use, you know, I believe about $3,000 a year. I am responding. Corsium is another one that our cardiac monitors, that's how they talk to the hospital. So those are all, you know, you could say a couple $1,000s a piece that you could average to figure that those subscriptions are.
So it's like software to talk to the hospital?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not like a magazine subscription.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
EMS Weekly is not included.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If there are no other questions, we can move to City Revolving Loan Fund. This would be on page 38 and 39. The Revolving Loan Fund, we renamed the first fund here to City Housing Fund. So this is where we take in TIF closure funds and have affordable housing projects or priorities. You can see here, pretty simple budget. We do anticipate having TID 5 closed and putting another about $180,000 into that fund. Then we have some professional services, and then ultimately $95,000 that we've put in for grants and other programs. So that would be for housing programs, right? So lot sale programs, first-time home buyer, whatever programs we want to issue for 2025. So we'll talk about allocating those funds after the budget is approved. There's still a fund balance there to do other things, but ultimately we're just looking at keeping some of that there so we're not spending it all at once, the 180 plus whatever else is out there. Then we have the CDBG Housing Division, which is the CDBG Revolving Loan Fund. That has minimal activity, but we just keep it moving or keep it included in here to document any professional costs, and those costs come from a private contract with MSA who manages the fund, and they pretty much, you know, if there's a loan closure or payback, we pay fees out of that fund. So pretty simple there. Looking then to, let's move to community promotion on page 41 and 42. So I think I skipped taxi quick. Community promotion is our room tax. So we take in approximately $125,000 of room tax. There's some donated funds that go in there, mostly from fireworks. So then the room tax, we are supposed to take 70% of that and turn that over to our tourism entity. You can see here in a revenue, I also have a transfer in. The idea here is to transfer in some fund balance of the room tax fund. There's $234,000 that is accumulated over a long period of time. We would transfer in $50,000 of that. And then on page 42, you can see sort of the breakdown. Tourism promotion and development. The $125,000 is split 70% has to go to the tourism entity. It would be recommended in the budget that that gets split 50-50 between Chamber and Main Street. That would require 2 separate agreements with Chamber and Main Street to provide tourism entity services to the city, which is essentially what happens today. The biggest thing is there's a different split of those funds that we turn over to the Chamber. So that would change. So they normally get 100% and then they split it. This would take it and split it 50-50 between the two. That is something that the council, through the agreements, can formalize or talk about. Ultimately, both of them would qualify as tourism and promotion or tourism and development agencies for the city, and both of them work in that field.
Can we ask a question?
Yep.
Would it be possible to add a third tourism thing for the Little White Schoolhouse?
I do not believe that under the current structure
In state law?
that it would qualify as a tourism entity, being that it is already a function of the chamber. There could be an allocation of these funds directly to the Little White Schoolhouse outside of this. If you would like to do that or recommend that, we can do that.
That would be my recommendation, because currently there is a percentage of the funds that the chamber receives from the city, and then a percentage of that goes to the Little White Schoolhouse. So if the percentage is reduced, that's going to the chamber, which is reflected in this proposal, and I don't have a problem with that. I would still be concerned that there's yet another reduction in what can be given to the schoolhouse. So if the board is willing, and I don't know if we would vote on this or not, it would be useful to have a line and then reduce both the Main Street and Chamber accordingly.
I wouldn't do that.
No?
It would have to come out of the 30% that the city retains for other things. So that would be my recommendation, because you do not potentially qualify as a tourism
Oh, because,
law.
okay, I
And we would need
understand.
an additional agreement with you saying that. So it would be a direct allocation, as would be to the Historic Preservation Commission, which is $2,500, or Envision Greater Fond du Lac, or the CDA. It would just be another added thing that we would put in, and what amount of money is enough, right?
Well, right now, about 6,300 has been given annually, at least that's what we've been shown. So, what would you think is fair, 6,500? Yeah. 6,500 for operations.
Is another approach to this putting in the chamber's agreement that a portion has to go to the schoolhouse? 'Cause I know the 70%.
I would say a certain percentage, I wouldn't say a portion, that's pretty broad.
But is it possible to specify a dollar amount of their money that has to go to?
Or a percentage.
Right.
Right, we could do a percentage, which would come close
Yeah.
to that 60.
Because 70% of the room tax has to go to a tourism entity, of which Little White Schoolhouse isn't considered, but the
It's already a
chamber,
part of.
the chamber
Right.
could,
But could that be part of the city's agreement with the chamber to specify? Because I'm concerned, frankly, I'm concerned if the money is reduced to the chamber, then the Little White Schoolhouse doesn't, even though they own it, doesn't get money, or it's significantly reduced.
I thought that Adam just said that the money's not reduced, that it's now, instead of giving it to them and then the chamber splits it, that we are splitting it.
So there's no formal agreement, there's only this deal that 60% is retained by the chamber and 40% goes to Main Street, right?
Right
So
now
this
it's
would
50-50.
effectively split it 50-50, and they would both be held accountable directly to the city council via their own agreements, and present independently and do that. So there's always been a chance that we turn it over to the chamber and they allocate it however they please. This takes that out of the equation and puts them on equal funding levels for tourism and promotion, right? I think the idea here is if they go from getting 60%, meaning the chamber, to 50%, that there could be a reflected cut to the Little White Schoolhouse, right? And would we work within the agreement to hold the Little White Schoolhouse harmless or allocate funds directly to the Little White Schoolhouse through our allocation to the chamber, or could we do that independently? If we do it independently, it comes out of the 30% that the city retains. Therefore, one of these other areas would have to be reduced in that amount, right? So that would be fireworks, historic preservation, Envision Greater Fond du Lac, community improvement, streetscape, holiday decorations, and community development authority. So that would be the decision, is how you want to handle that.
Steve?
What are the community improvements and the holiday decorations and the streetscape? What is this? What does it consist of?
That consists of anything like this past year, hanging baskets, new garbage and recycling containers, right? Streetscape downtown improvements. It's a flexible pot of money to enhance and do downtown improvements. Streetscape can be, the new poles, right, downtown. It's just money that is put into beautifying the community, particularly working with Main Street.
Okay, so we put new poles up and what other poles are you gonna put up?
I'm just saying, traditionally, it's been used for that type of stuff.
Yeah, well, I was
We
just
have
curious what
projects
improvements are you gonna do?
We have projects that we're working with Main Street on, including electronic messaging boards to replace the ones that are out there. There are projects that we are constantly working on and looking to enhance it, and the Main Street is bringing in a consultant to do streetscape. So we're looking at partnering with them, using their resources from the bid district and their funds to further enhance streetscape and other amenities in the downtown. Or we could do it other areas. There's holiday decorations, there's ideas. It's just a flexible pot of money to enhance and work with the partners that are trying to work within the downtown.
Does Ripon Main Street get the 100% of the bid district money?
Yeah,
They do.
that is, yep, they are funded through the bid. That is, so generally speaking, they are funded through bid, room tax, and, fundraising or their concert activities.
Yeah.
The chamber is funded through room tax,
Membership.
and, whatever other fundraising or event activities that, they generate income from. So.
I do like that 50-50 split. To me, seems more fair.
I do just want to clarify that the community improvement streetscape holiday decorations, that is not limited to just downtown. The bid money that you were speaking of is strictly limited to the bid district, which is downtown. But this fund can be for any community development. Traditionally, we have put that money towards the downtown, but it could be used elsewhere.
on the 23 corridor, either end. So my question is, how can we handle not, to ensure, guarantee that the Little White Schoolhouse still receives money, if that could be in the agreement with the chamber?
We would just have to specify that in the agreement.
Okay.
If there's anything else that would want to be put toward the Little White Schoolhouse, we can add a line item to put Little White Schoolhouse in here. And then it takes it out of the agreement, because the chamber has to agree to that, right? And if we are saying we want this amount of your allocation to go to Little White Schoolhouse, they have to agree to that.
What would you recommend?
Depends on the amount. You know,
Well,
because
6,500, I think, would be the amount.
yeah, and then it comes down to the council's, decision on where the money can be allocated and the impact, right? Because where would you reduce or allocate funds otherwise?
And just so you know, 6,500 would be about 15% of that allocated amount.
Yeah, I know. I did it up here.
Jolene?
So first I want to say both the Chamber and Main Street are two entities that I highly respect in this community. And so first and foremost, I'm glad to see that we are promoting them here. My question is, so we're talking, I heard a statement of this makes it fairer. And just so I understand, the Main Street is just down the Main Street district, and the Chamber covers the entire area of Ripon plus the Little White Schoolhouse. So a 50-50 split is a little bit unique. I mean, when you say it makes it fairer, it seems to me the chamber covers more areas as well as the Little White Schoolhouse, which you're advocating for.
In my mind, I'm thinking that with the membership for the chamber, they bring in more money than Ripon Main Street does. Now, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that's my thought.
Well, and the other issue too is that the chamber used to be responsible for September Fest, and that's gone now, which was a downtown event. And they also have chamber members who are in the downtown, but they've really cut back on the services that they've been providing to the community also.
And keep in mind, the money that this is supposed to be used for is to get more people to come to town, stay in the hotels, and get more money into that room tax fund. So it's supposed to be a cyclical thing. And to her point, the chamber is doing less events, and Main Street keeps adding events. So in my opinion, supporting Main Street with they're bringing more people to the city at this point than the chamber, from my view. Helping support that seems to be a good investment.
And we know that, I seem to think of their presentations that they gave to us. I'm not sure, I think their reasoning for not having September Fest was their data showed people weren't coming to stay overnight for September Fest, whereas maybe they were for things like Dickens, it's drawing a wider area. I think that their presentation showed that not having September Fest allowed them to, I think, invest in that app or other things, that was part of their presentation.
But the app doesn't bring people to town.
I think their argument was it was. But anyways, I guess that's for them to decide.
It really comes down to, we have to identify and provide 70% of the room tax fund to tourism entities that promote and develop tourism in the community. Who's doing that? Both are doing it, right? What level of success they're having in each is, we could sit here all night and talk about who's doing this better or why people are coming to town, right? There are hotels in the downtown. There are Airbnbs in the downtown. There are hotels outside of the downtown, then Airbnbs all over the place, right? Ultimately, there's probably a better approach to add a line item of the Little White Schoolhouse in here. Because to dictate how the chamber or the Main Street has to spend their money sort of takes us, at that point, we may as well just become a tourism commission ourselves and have everybody who wants a piece of the pie come before a board and ignore this whole tourism entity agreement thing, right? So I think pulling it out and finding an area to take funds out of here, and we could simply do it by reducing the amount in the Community Development Authority by around $5,000. If $5,000 was enough, we could put that toward the Little White Schoolhouse with the assumption that the chamber will still contribute a portion of their $43,000, which this is an estimate. We have collected more in the past, way more, right? Okay? So, you know, as, you know, this is pretty light in terms of, you know, so we can, I think, make that change fairly easily and do 5,000, and then I think they can contribute however much they feel is necessary in theirs. At least you have held harmless from a cut in the reduction of the 10%.
Jonathan, do you have a problem with the CDA being reduced 5,000?
No, I would have suggested maybe pulling a little out of Envision.
You're a funny guy, Jonathan.
So a couple things, right? So Envision, Greater Fond du Lac, I will say last year was wildly different, right? And what has done in the last year, and the services they provide and the commitment they have made to Ripon and the impact they have made for small business entrepreneurship and you know, holding office hours here, is worth way more than $6,500. And we have an MOU with them that will be brought forward. And the recommendation is to restore funding from my budget, from the budget perspective, right? They are doing a lot of work that, from an economic development perspective, that they weren't necessarily doing a year ago. And so that relationship has been far more positive, and the services they're bringing to the table, if they can continue to do that, are worth $13,000, no doubt.
And last year, we cut their funding in half with the message that we expect more from you. We have certainly gotten more from them, which is why we want to restore the fund.
I'm pretty satisfied with the direction that Envision's been going with us here in the city. I think it's well worth what we're offering, probably far more, if they can continue with that.
I agree.
It has seemed to be, Envision in this previous incarnations have been kind of up and down over the last 15 years or so, but if it continues on this trajectory, I'm happy with the direction it's going.
The overall intention with the CDA was just to get the pass-through of the $50,000 at least into the hands of the CDA to further enhance what they could do from a development perspective. So the rest of it, with the minor changes here or there, I think is fairly solid, and we can add the Little White Schoolhouse in that 5,000 in the next iteration, and if the council wants to change that, we can certainly change it.
Thank you.
That's all for room tax. Taxi fund, I'll go back to the PowerPoint and talk a little bit about this. So obviously the tax fund has a financial deficit. You know, over the past few years, it's grown from $165,000 to $302,000 in 2023. The deficit has increased more rapidly or exponentially due to the increase in operating costs through the years of the new contract. We bid out or rebid taxi service, and Brown Cab was the chosen vendor. But we went from like 20 some dollars, low 20s per hour to operate the taxi, to now our rate is $31.26. So it's grown, the cost per hour to operate has increased, as well as we did acquire 2 new taxis and we paid, tens of thousands of dollars, right, for our portion of that. So that deficit has grown. We increased rates in 2023 to kind of try to get ahead of some of the deficit. That hasn't necessarily helped. The federal and state share remains at 54.7%, okay? That used to be 70% or more, okay? So the federal share and the state share has dropped over time, forcing, right, the municipality or the rates to pick up a bigger piece of the pie. So here's a scenario and why we are where we are. $31.26 per hour, right, to operate one taxi. The grant covers 54.7%, so we get $17.10. If we do, on average, we do 2.5 rides per hour. That's what we're doing. That is what we're doing. So if we did 2.5 senior rides for the hour, we're taking in around $8.75 or $9 in revenue. That leaves a $5.40 shortfall per hour in that example. Per taxi.
Per taxi. Steve,
Okay?
hold on.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, well, we used to have a commission for this. Every year they had to summarize everything for this commission. And Brown was part of that. That's when they first started up. A long time ago, I was on that. Just for a little history. Well, how much per ride are we getting for the seniors?
The fare cost?
There's a fee
Yeah, the
structure.
fair cost, how much is it per ride?
$275.
We just raised the rates. I can look it up here. Just give me a second.
I mean, I'd like to see the rates stay low, but the point is gasoline prices went up.
Probably too low now.
Everything else is going up, the wages are going up.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah. So currently, the adult fare is
Right here.
$475, senior fare is $350.
Student
So if we
for,
went 50 cents more on a senior fare, they're gonna put people out.
so here's, before we talk about that, so the 2024 rate will increase by a CPI for 2025, right? The projected deficit for 2024 is $55,000 in our grant application. So every year, we fill out a grant application, we put in the numbers, and the government, federal and state say, we're covering this, we anticipate this amount of rate. We are going to continue to lose $50,000+ a year under the current operating structure, right? We have reached out to both DOT and Brown Cap to talk about the deficit. We are not dissimilar to any other community across the state that has this same program. And we were talking Waupun, Wapaka, Fort Atkinson, right? Smaller communities. The idea of the program from a shared ride perspective is to share rides, right? To have multiple people going in the cab at the same time. And there is always been a local match and a local share. That has gotten, as we've seen, worse. So we talked with DOT and Brown Cab about recommended changes to the taxi service, right? Including elimination of certain hours, including number of drivers out, right? We will work through that and bring together some recommendations to the council. The council is now the Transportation Commission, right? We are required to have public hearings for any changes, and we are trying to sort of fill the gap or at least stop some of the bleeding here by allocating $15,000 of general fund this year to it, right? We certainly could make other cuts and allocate more, right? But losing $55,000, $60,000 a year versus $20,000 to $30,000 with cuts and allocations is certainly preferred at this point. Because as I will say here, under the current trajectory, we probably have about 2 or 3 years before we have to consider, at the current rate of decline in the of suspending the program. That is, so we have looked at the data. We will use data and use, ridership and look at it, right? Rates, we will need to look at rates. At the same time, rates is not going, that's not the only thing that's going to save this, right? That's a piece of the puzzle. But for every hour you cut, you only save, 45%, because you have the federal government paying for portions. So all of this comes down to recommendations that will be made by Brown Cab, and we'll bring them forward, so.
The guys that used to, sorry to interrupt you again, but the guys that used to run Brown Cab, the dad, he was pretty good with the people of the state of Wisconsin, and he got a lot of grants for different things, like he could get a grant for this taxi, and he could get a grant separately for fees. So if you needed a wheelchair taxi, he could get partial grant for that. Is the new guys that are taking over the Brown Cab?
It's his son, Justin, and they do over 1 million rides a year, right?
Yeah, well, they're doing Ripon and they're doing other places.
The problem is that the state and federal share has declined to only be 55%.
Right.
We get other grants for vehicles at an 80-20 split, right? We do that, right? The state recently pulled this transit out of the transportation budget and put it into the general budget for the state, right? For a reason, they took transit out of transportation. So this is not from a state level. That is the key, but we're not going to change that, in the next, and it could get arguably worse. So, talking to our legislature about these issues as they look at their budgets, and now it's easier to cut transit because it's not in transportation. This is what Justin Running and Brown Cab are discussing with me, because I said the same thing. What can we do, right? There are other things we can do. We may sell and wrap the taxis with advertisement. Anybody want to pay us to put an ad on the side of the taxi? We'll take it. That is where we are at, right? So it's going to have to be multiple things, not overly aggressive or punitive, right, to certain, but we have to make data and good decisions. Sorry.
In the short term, are we making sure that, for example, that Ripon College students know about this number? Are we doing anything to communicate to them, or even just putting reminders on the city? I have to be honest, I think often I'm lucky that I have my own vehicle, so I can go. I don't think of, maybe it's like helping my civic, it's doing my civic duty, or is helping my community by taking a cab instead of taking my own car sometime. I mean, if people were to think about, what a great option, I want to support this, or are we making sure also that all of the students, are these some just some general things that we
make known that there's a taxi service. Any changes that we make in terms of we'll have to have public hearings, right? But
when you were on the students, we had something in our welcome bags that I think had the number.
That isn't, while that's nice, that isn't going to reverse this in a big way.
I hear you.
It's just, we have to look at how it's being used, where we're basically having a taxi sit there not moving, right? What hours? And slow this. We can certainly market it differently, right? But that also costs money. Brown Cab does that. We can market it differently. We can post out there on it. Ultimately, increasing ridership isn't necessarily going to solve this problem.
John?
Could you tell me again how many rides per hour?
2.5. So we'll do a whole report on data.
Okay. Is that per cab or just or 2 or 3?
Just the whole year, right? The number of hours we're running versus the number of rides. we are completing, right? There are times where, they target areas, right, or times where they have 4, 5, or 6 taxi cabs out, right? In the morning, there are sometimes 5 or 6 taxis out. A lot of the pressure put on the taxi service is because of the school district, right? We're providing essentially busing for students, right, that are paying. And so there's a higher demand at that point. There are things that have changed in the local dynamics that have put pressure on the taxi at certain times. But generally speaking, the data shows 2.5 rides per hour.
Okay.
So,
Doug?
Yeah, so just to summarize, it sounds like the state and the feds have cut so much funding, it's becoming almost untenable for us to continue the service without some drastic changes. Would that be a fair assessment before we saw the report that you're putting together?
that is a fair assessment. And from a budget perspective, we again are passing a deficit, right?
Real quick, could you remind us what size that the state of Wisconsin is holding now? Was it about $3 billion? They have something
more than
like
us.
that?
That's all I know.
They have a large part of money that they haven't done anything with. They're just kind of sitting on it. Election's coming up. They're not going to do anything for us. Just saying.
Ultimately here, you can see sort of the numbers and why this doesn't work. Even with 15,000 coming in, we'd lose 60 without it. So with the cost increasing. So from a budgetary perspective, some of those numbers could change if we decide to make some changes to the overall operation. So we will bring those things forward and have a broader conversation about what level of service we can continue to provide in the taxi. Okay. Stuff to think about. Recycling fund, really quite simple. We have adjusted it to meet the recycling contract with Waste Management, which is a 5% increase. So that budget would have that 5% increase in, so that would be adjusted in the fee schedule for the year, okay? Library fund. So obviously this...
Is that a one-year contract like with them? Every year they can bump it?
Yeah, so it's like a 5-year contract, but it's like, it's consumer price index increase or 5%, whatever is, I think, less. And I think for their consumer price index for waste, it was more than 5%. So, but it's 75 cents per quarter, so it's, you know, $3.
This year, and then next year.
Yeah, $3 is, so. Library funding, obviously, this has been a point of discussion and a point of, you know, pain at times when we're looking at allocating funds to the library. The library submitted a budget request of $470,430, or an $18,000 increase. $18,000 increase, or 4%. The allocation in 2024 was $452,000. We did sign the MOU, and there's planned reductions in the allocation for services rendered by the city, that for lawn care and for other like payroll software upgrades, things like that. So there needs to be an adjustment there of approximately $2,000 to $3,000. So the recommended allocation is a little bit lower than that to meet the tax levy adjustments at $448,000. Ultimately, we have talked about this in the past. They have always asked for more. You can see a chart there. Their funding from the city has remained relatively flat over the last 5-6 years, while their fund balance has grown exponentially. Okay? Now, one of the issues from last year was we did increase it by around $4,000 or $5,000. what we then found was in the audit, a prior period adjustment of $265,000 that we didn't know about or was not being accounted for, right? And that's not anything, there's no fraud or anything going on there, right? This was just poor reporting. And we have done a lot of work, and the library board deserves a lot of credit for doing a lot of work in getting things back on track, right? And reporting. They are working more collaboratively with the city and Amanda through the accounting of a lot of these issues. And we have a very clear picture, right? At the end of the day, last year, we increased that allocation and cut general fund because, you know, they asked for more and we had the funds to give. But they were in a stronger financial position at that time than we had thought, right? They had a decline in their fund balance, which resulted in an increase the following year with the audit, right? Okay. That was sort of not correct based on the prior period adjustment. So the $448,000 is what is being recommended. And I will just note that that allocation directly impacts, you know, tax rate. It impacts our ability to fund other general fund expenditures. Certainly we can increase it if we find a position to better fund something like through transportation aid. If we don't want to reduce taxes X amount of dollars, we can shift funds and provide them more funding here. But my general feeling is we are not going to be able to satisfy their full request without cutting something and or they certainly have $860,000 in their account that they can certainly use for some things. Obviously, there is a project that they hope to do that is a result of a lot of the fund balance increase, but the fund balance has been at $315,000 long before the dream of a project occurred, right? So we continue to work through this, and but this is the recommended allocation going into the budget.
I just would like to point out, some of that has already been allocated for the renovation project, whenever that gets going. Some of that will be allocated for maintenance issues on the building, including AC replacement issues and some other things going forward. So once we get that project going, some of that money will be disappearing over the next few years, in my estimation. So 3 or 4 budget cycles down the road, you're going to see that fund balance is not going to be anywhere close to that. But we are trying to use it expeditionally so that we're not depending on the city to kick in money for maintenance issues that we have money for. Now, maybe down the road, there's a bigger project that we can't fully fund or we need some money kicked in, but that is something that would be way down the road at this point. I can't even conceive what that would be because we still have to go through the building and look at all the mechanicals of what we need and what we can handle. But I think right now we have money allocated that will, I think, would take care of most of that. So down the road, maybe, but not right now. Guess that's what I'm saying. Way down the road. I'll make you happier.
Yeah, and obviously the library budget and these funds are, the only thing that this body controls is the allocation, right? That's all, that's it. The allocation and the spending of the fund balance, or where that goes, is a library board decision. Going back to 2019, they had $315,000 in their fund balance. They have a $600,000 budget. They have a 50% reserve, right? That's healthy. That's healthy, right? We have 23%, right? With a goal of 30. So this comes down to is where they are positioned from an economic perspective versus other funds, and where are their priorities. The library certainly is a priority for funding. We fund them a significant portion, 70% of their budget comes from the city, right? So ultimately, you know, from my perspective in going into this, if we have the opportunity to increase that and get them closer to either a freeze or maybe more, depending on how things come out, we will make that recommendation. But going into it right now, based on the factors everywhere else, the recommendation is the $448,000. That's just the recommendation. The council certainly can say we want to see that increased, and if that's the case, we will work to make reductions or adjustments somewhere else.
This budget was submitted by the former library
Correct.
director. I think we go with what you've recommended. We will be we're in the process of hiring a new library director. Let that person look at the budget and have, let them work within the budget that they have and see if they then request more money.
And meanwhile, if there is a shortfall for what they see, they have a fund balance to cover.
Right.
More than that.
They have a robust fund balance.
Is it typical for that position to get a service to help hire? And I'm not, obviously that's the board to decide, but if they wanted to spend something on that, and if clearly it wasn't budgeted, how do they? The city is helping them recruit that. We have an HR so they're
Yeah, we have people that have already applied.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
So we are helping, right? Amanda is working with them from a financial perspective. They will have the auditor go talk to them. We have had to communicate some of these things to them over time. But I feel like, generally speaking, we are in a far better place today than we were a couple years ago when we started to ask some questions. And by asking the questions, we found some very important information.
I'd spent the last year working with the former director and explaining how different strategies for budgeting, and had recommended that she talk with Adam to see what his preference was. There's plenty of money in this budget. There's plenty of money in this budget. There's no reason to increase it at all.
I just want to be clear on this. It's my understanding that that the library received levied money, and then they didn't use it, but they saved it.
So there was a document in a report that the auditors put together that there was a carryover of levy funds that was put into the fund balance, right?
Okay.
And from a math perspective, right? If you continue to fund somebody at a same level, but their fund balance continues to go up and they had money from the levy already in that.
Don't ask for more levy.
Right.
It's still there. Okay? So, and we've remained relatively flat in terms of funding. So, it's not a lot that was found in that, but certainly there was some, like $18,000 or so that was carried over, and that was reported to them a couple years ago.
And that's all it is?
That's
18?
all it was, yes, that's all
Okay.
it was, that we were aware of.
But typically when you're doing levy and you have $18,000 in levy left over, you don't ask for more money. The next year you do fund balance applied.
Okay. Yeah. I thought it was more than, 18's a lot, but I still thought.
No, it's around that, and then they've designated a lot of their funds, and then there's also the Friends of the Library that helps fund them, and we have, yeah.
There's actually two groups that fund that do things for the library. For instance, the Ripon Library Association, separate from the Friends, different EIN numbers, different people. recently funded the phone system in the library. They paid for it. So if they're out there listening, Ripon Library Association, thank you very much. As we said last night, it was a very generous donation to allow us to do that. The Friends of the Library do the book sales. Two different groups. The Ripon Library Association does not typically have direct contact with anybody. They just watch and see what they think we might need, and they fund it, like the phone system, so.
This is just a small amount, but it makes me think of our larger picture. I see that under subscriptions, they have a social media archiving that for $500.
None of that is our business.
I understand that. But my question is, even though it's not our business, we're putting money towards that, and I can imagine that other entities may need to be doing that theoretically, or even if they don't, I guess my point is, in general, when things, maybe supplies, office supplies, let's say, across departments, can you remind me as far as, do we have a plan that we are sharing, making sure we're buying in bulk, for example, or we're sharing services where it's appropriate? Is there that cross work when it can be shared among departments? Because each department has supplies, for example, listed. And are we looking at how to buy in bulk or how to save money, these types of things?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we try to do that at any time we can. Ultimately, that is a buying decision by the library, right? And if they don't choose to participate with us in something, that is on them. We certainly can have those conversations with them in this particular case, but all of our other departments, we work collaboratively to do software, to do, cleaner, toilet paper, whatever you want to, throw out there. Alan and Bill and Mitch, they all buy this, we all buy the same stuff, right? And we all have, it's relative, archive social, we all share in it. They may even share, and that may just be their portion of what we pay for through it. So I think that can certainly improve as we do things like in the MOU, we're providing them lawn care services. Like as we offer more, there's always opportunity to collaborate more, so.
Do you want to know about any typos?
Sure.
It is, I just circled it, page 46, bottom section, operational supplies, 1, 2, 3, fourth line, it says adult. Adult books. Books are not doll.
Thank you.
All right, we'll quick move on here. So debt service fund, that's on page 47, 48. Page 48 lists all the GO debt. So as you can see here, this is a nice graph summarizing what we would levy for debt versus what the total debt was. So up until 2022, we were not levying the full amount of debt. You can probably trace back some of the financial struggles to that decision to not levy the full amount because operational levy was going to pay debt to the tune of $500,000+ a year. We have since levied the full amount of our debt on the tax levy. And with TID closures and everything, the impact of some of that has been limited. This does not include the $200,000 extra for capital. That will be discussed next in the capital improvement. Capital improvements includes the $200,000 transfer from the levy to go into the deficit to impact that, right? The general funding for capital improvement is grant funding, including DNR stewardship and CDBG grants. There's $2.25 million of borrowing, $600,000 of TID and utility transfers. And then this does not include the DPW facility. The planned projects, it's a more aggressive capital campaign, partially because the Selfridge project did not happen this year and is getting bumped to next year. So that is a significant, about $1 million that was otherwise supposed to be spent in 2024. Planned improvements and planned projects include a Selfridge playground for $200,000, a brush tripper for $150,000, Hamburg Henny for $2.3 million, SCADA system upgrades that we've been talking about for the last 3 years at $300,000. Buildings, we're looking at Selfridge Park project, City Hall boilers, which we could cut in half and do 50,000. Murray Park infields, and then sewer plant HVAC upgrades totaling $150,000. So a mix of parks, infrastructure, technology, and facilities. All projects totaling, well over, $50,000 apiece. Yes.
Can you go with the boilers for a minute? The City Hall, how old are they?
The boilers are approaching end of life. We had Alan look at them. They're
They're in excess of 20 years old.
Okay,
The
so
manufacturer recommends 20 years.
That's end of life then. So do you have something already picked up? Do you have something picked out, something in mind to replace them with?
Our maintenance contractor knows what we need when we give them the word. It takes about 4 weeks to get them.
Okay, so that's about 25 apiece?
No,
There's 2 boilers.
2 boilers.
Oh, right, 50 apiece, sorry.
We may only replace one because we can do that just so we're not replacing them at the same time, because that pushes you in a position where 20 years from now, you may have to replace them at the same time
Right, so
again.
when would you replace the second one? 5 years later?
Yeah, we would just plan it out.
Okay, well, I mean, that makes sense to me, but is the other boiler going to last that long?
We've had assurance that we can operate
Yes.
if one goes down.
We've had these discussions just last week, I think it was.
Okay, well, that's good.
We can operate on one boiler, but we don't want to operate on just one.
Right, so if we replace one, and the other one is still, or one of them is still good for 3, 4, 5 years,
Right.
and we replace it then we're staggering the replacement. Hopefully. Okay, well, that makes sense to me.
And if we budget the full 100,000 in 2025, and we replace one, can we squirrel that extra 50 away, so in the event that the second one goes down, we can
I wouldn't
add it in the fund?
I wouldn't do that. I would just cut it out and we'd be fine.
That's the levy change right there.
That's not levy supported, so that would not help.
Oh, it's a capital project.
It is a capital project, borrowed. So, but those are, it's a little, there's a lot in here, and again, it doesn't include the DPW facility. So from a capital perspective, next year will be rather intense. You have Hamburg Henny, Selfridge Park, DPW facility. Those are massive projects in itself, so independent. Doing them all together in a year, let's go, Alan, let's get it done. I'll just go over these really quickly. They're really kind of independent. TID 6 is closing out as well. We'll close that early. We'll transfer excess funds to the housing fund, or TID 11. TID 7 is an extension candidate. There's increase because we're seeing some houses built out there. TID 9, salary allocations, debt payments for the water sewer revenue bonds. TID 10, salary allocation and transfer of access increment to number 11. TID 11. TID 11 is the downtown. There's significant increment sharing planned there. There's debt payments, and then there's some pass-through of approximately $300,000 to the capital project funds to help support the Selfridge project. The TID 12 is salary allocation and an alliance incentive. TID 14 is salary and alliance, as well as paying for the water tower, and then transfer of access increment from 14 to 11. And then TID 15 increment is increasing, and really the only expense there is the Knuth Brewing incentive that we have in the development agreement. Those are the TIF funds in a nutshell. Sewer revenues, the financial management plan recommended a 15% increase in the rates to help fund capital. We just did a 50% increase a couple years ago. The council sets the rate, so that will be your decision whether or not to follow that recommendation in the financial management plan. We are reviewing and looking at user agreements. While the last increase was a 50% and was kind of across the board 50%, this 15% increase, while it's reflected in the budget, is kind of across the board, could become more strategic based on user class and some of the challenges we're seeing with sewer use. So ultimately, a 15% increase with a 11.43% increase in total revenues requested in the sewer fund budget. Expenditures increased by about 6.61%. There's a transfer to capital, so there's the idea that we transfer funds from sewer to the capital fund in $110,000. Chemical and testing costs have increased by 23.7%, a significant increase there because of some of the industrial user challenges we've seen. $150,000 for sludge hauling, which is increasing and is a very high cost. $45,000 for jetting and televising, and then $100,000 that we put in a replacement fund. So the biggest question with sewer becomes rates and whether or not we raise them and how much. That is again set by the council as part of the fee structure for the year.
But the recommended sewer rate increase, is that just to catch us up to where we kind of should be? Or does that help set that trajectory so that we can start to, dig out of the hole? Is that a stoppage or is that a?
We're not necessarily in the hole. What it does is it helps prepare us for some of the revenue debt that we're gonna have to take on to do some of the capital projects, and it's portioned. So the financial management plan will layer in rate increases, and that will come down the road. We'll show you the full scope of it, but the management plan recommends right off the bat 15% to get the ball rolling on providing additional funds for capital and providing more dollars in the bank to do projects.
And just for clarification, besides the rate increase we just did, how long had it been since sewer rates were increased?
Similar.
Multiple years?
Yes.
It was probably 15 years or more.
Yeah.
Like the water.
Water, the last one was 2020, or 2013, I believe.
Right, and that was a small
one.
And before that, the
2007.
most I could tell was right after we acquired the water utility, there was the discussions for major rate increase, but the council did not want to go forward. It was tabled and nothing ever happened. So we can't deal with what ifs, we have to move forward.
Can you explain the industrial user?
The industrial user issue is we have like 4 or 5 industrial users that are sampled, and then we bill them based on a Class B user rating. So they have different things they have to meet and limits within their discharge, and when they exceed those, there's essentially a penalty assessed, and we do that monthly. We bill them out. What we have found is that the testing adequacy is not necessarily, we test twice a year, and then base that entire year of billing on 2 tests. Well, I mean, industries and the people there, I'm not saying they're doing, it's 1 week. You're basing an entire year off of they could be violating, and if we have an issue at a treatment plant, right, where which we've been failing wet tests because of toxicity, what is that a result of? So then we're sitting here having to test more, hence why the testing and chemicals cost is up. But when you look at that, what is the cost to provide that service to the user in an industry versus, say, a typical residential customer? Because it's going to be more. And then when you do a rate increase, you can layer the rate increase to be more heavily skewed to those who are, using it more, like an industry, right? That is really the whole idea. So we're going through, and we'll have a presentation about studying this with MSA coming up here, and looking and reviewing all of the agreements and having independent agreements that say, here's what you're allowed to discharge and here's what it costs above that. That penalty, or that fee that we charge, could be increased, right? At a point where then it doesn't fall, the full 15% doesn't fall on the residents. When you look at like doing a treatment plant upgrade, if the cost of the treatment plant is $1 million and 30% of the treatment plant is being used by industry, you weight the rate increase to pay for that $1 million to the industry. That may not be popular either, but it does protect your average person and your average resident from paying for industrial use of a treatment facility that typically costs more. So that's really where we're headed with it, is just reviewing the agreements and then potentially seeing what the rate structure looks like for everybody versus just a blanket 15%.
As part of that, and maybe potentially testing more often than twice a year.
That's where some of the costs come into play, right? And are we covering our costs to provide the service to the industries and do what we need to do to ensure that we're in compliance at the treatment plant discharging into Silver Creek? Because that's where it hits, that's where we get in trouble, right? Is when we can't meet our limits. So that's why there are penalties, and we do charge more because it is a higher cost. We're not out there sampling in front of a manhole in front of your house, Jonathan, you know, like we are at some of the larger industries.
I do like to make the point or emphasize your point that in that industry use that there's fees and penalties, I'm assuming in the agreement, so that they're paying for their usage and the treatment costs, but then when they're going above and beyond what the agreement and what, you know, we can handle generally is, then they're taking that penalty, which just seems like it's pretty much fair across the board because they're paying for their usage, and then when they go above and beyond, then there's that extra on top.
So if this industry or these industries here were to put better controls on their wastewater, then there wouldn't be such an issue that we might not have to.
Absolutely, and our costs would lower it, and we wouldn't have to then surcharge them, and it wouldn't, you know, it all kind of trickles from them, right? So we are actively working on this with some of our larger industrial users, and they can make adjustments and spend money that make more sense in the long term versus paying us to treat their discharge, right? They can handle it, you know, through pre-treatment or something else. So those are all worked out in independent treatment agreements or user agreements with each industry. So that's what we're working with. We haven't had those, and that's been part of the problem. So we'll continue to work through that. Water fund, there's no recommended increase other than what the 2024 includes the new rate structure. There's new rates, but there's a decrease in the budget, I believe. The reason that is because we shot too high last year in budget with a projection of 2024 rates, and we didn't get them in place. So that's why there's a bit of a decline there. Expenditures are decreased as well. And then it's broken down by division. Really, the increases in source of supply division, wellhead work, and capital division is really meters and vehicle payments. So ultimately, water fund is a little bit more complex than sewer, but no rate increase or anything projected there. The bid is, see handout, it's money in, money out. The taxes are set by the bid operating plan, and that is forwarded to Main Street. That's the approximate amount they assess themselves in the bid district. All right, just to kind of wrap things up here, because it's been a while. Future budget considerations, you know, really the taxi hours and service levels, we'll have to talk about that. That's a more immediate thing. We'll bring forward some recommendations. Garbage collection moving forward, implementation of a fee in future years or a contracted service. We would have to reduce our levy that amount, but as we see capital costs and other costs increase for that service, pulling that out into a fee would likely be a recommended move. Capital funding, following through on financial management plan recommendations and finding sustainable funding. Staffing and benefits, just appropriate staffing models and cuts based on service levels. And then health insurance is sustainability. And then moving forward for road projects and other revenue sources, including special assessments for sidewalks and road projects, which we haven't presented as an option, but certainly add money to help fund capital and large infrastructure projects. Next steps, we'll review and introduce any changes on the 8th to the budget, and then 28th, we'll continue on the timeline, review the fee schedule, and then we'll also present a final financial management report. With that, if there are any other questions, please let me know.
The contracted garbage.
Yeah.
You're saying pulling it out, so it would be voluntary opt-in for a fee?
What it would be is, if you create a garbage fee, you have to reduce your levy that amount. So say that it's $100,000, which is like $250,000 to run that service. We would reduce the levy that amount and then create a fee based on the number of users, right, to continue to provide that service. So you reduce the levy, you put it in as a fee, it would be lumped into the recycling, it'd be a waste and recycling fund, it'd be a separate fund that would just fund the expenditures of running the program with a fee on a utility bill. So you reduce the levy, but you push it out partially because the rate of the cost to provide the service continues to erode in the general fund, right?
Right, we wouldn't also have the capital.
Service remains the same.
We wouldn't have the capital cost of the truck and everything. to think of it.
You could break it out and build into the fee structure the capital cost, so you could replace a garbage truck if we stay in the garbage business. Right now, and this is the main problem, we will have to buy a $400,000 garbage truck soon again, right? And that is where we absolutely struggle to fund that, right? That major capital. We can provide the service rather efficiently. It's the capital and the inflationary cost of tipping fees that are driving it to be more unsustainable.
I'm sorry, so you're talking about us just cutting that out and making that separate contracted service of the city?
You could theoretically bid it out to see if we are as efficient at doing it as the private sector.
I don't think we'll find anybody, but...
Well, we would, because Waste Management does recycling.
Right.
So we could find somebody, it would then just be a numbers,
Right.
a number thing, and what level of, what the cost is to the resident, right?
But whether we spin out the service to a private contractor or we continue to do it ourselves, we can create this separate fund in the utility along with the recycling.
Right, so...
Just so that portion of the budget is easier to adjust to inflation.
Adjust, and so it would probably almost be a wash at first, but we could then increase the cost.
The first year or two would be a perfect wash.
But then year 3, year 4, year 5, there would be adjustments probably upward.
Adjust as needed.
Right, just to keep the service, but it does keep it more viable for the city then. If, you know, we just take the hit off the levy and just move forward, which is what I've kind of advocated in the past, but.
It's not something we're recommending this year, but it is something that needs to likely be considered in the future.
It's coming, I can see that.
As we approach having to buy a new
truck.
garbage truck,
When's the old one paid off? When do we finish it?
that's part of the $200,000, Doug, 5 years from now.
Okay, thank you, Adam.
So I thank you all. If there's any other, we made a couple changes. If there's anything you have questions about, certainly reach out to myself or Amanda. I thank you for staying here tonight this late. I appreciate the work from the department heads in working on their budgets and getting it done. I appreciate the work of Amanda and putting most, if not all of this together for you into a legible and manageable document, although it's rather long. There's been a lot of work going into it, which certainly not done. And if there's any other feedback, we can take that, either Amanda or I, but we'll talk again about it in about a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Move to adjourn?
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion by Al and a second by John. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Opposed? Al Schrader's old chair.
We're adjourned at 8:52.